Hello and welcome to the Word for Women podcast. I'm Christina, your host, and my guests are people who operate at the intersection of science and spirituality. It is my great pleasure today to speak with Teodora Pile. Welcome to the show, Teo.
Thank you, Christina. It's an honor and a joy to be here with you.
It's likewise an honor and a joy to be here with you. And for our listeners, Teodora Pile is a trauma-informed coach and chronic stress specialist, helping people who experience physical or emotional symptoms reclaim health, transform trauma, and release emotions that no longer serve them, so they can live their lives aligned to their values and make positive changes. Teo is a deeply wise, kind, and authentic human whom I recently had the pleasure to work with, and I'm really excited to have her on the show today. And with that, I'm gonna jump straight into my first question for you, Teo. So, if you look back on your professional trajectory as a book, what would its table of contents look like?
Oh, I love this question. First of all, it would be the beginnings. Then, like the U-turn, how things progressed, where they are now, and where are we going.
Hmm. You want to share a bit more on that?
Definitely, yes, in terms of the beginnings, like everyone's beginning, our childhood and how we grew up. And I always, not only me believe, but a lot of the scientific research shares that our early experiences really shape who we are and who we can be in the world. But of course, it's a blueprint. It's not the foundation. It's not the house. It's just the blueprint of the house. And then the U-turn will be in a way some of the experiences that in a way where we have a dip, but in the dip, or we say, or how I like to say, going into the underworld or meeting Hades,
Mm.
really helps us to see ourselves differently. And then it's the up journey in terms of how it's going, how we discover ourselves. And also I do believe in the power of curiosity and really experiencing and really practicing the muscle of being okay with the unknown.
Mm.
So
Oh,
also from a spiritual perspective, it's like we create things from the unknown, from the blackness.
I love that. We had a couple of chats. So for our listeners, Theo and I met. I think it was earlier this year, though, right? Wow, that time does go by quickly. And we did already have a couple of chats in addition to me being Theo's client, and this idea of the underworld and the unknown came up, and it's something I personally deeply resonate with, and I want to use that to take us into the second question that I have for you, because I think it would be very valuable for our listeners to understand a little bit more about your work and your philosophy. So tell us a bit more about your work as a trauma-informed coach, because I know that you had a career pivot at one point as well. So I really want to ask you, what led you to decide to take this path, and what modalities do you work with?
Hmm, thank you. Yes, my background is in law and IT. I am a multifaceted person, but I think most of us are. And yes, my journey started with my own, in a way, challenges with anxiety, depression, and I came across a program called the Lightning Process, which is like a brain retraining program. And then, in a way, that was the U-turn, the pivot point of my life, where that program really helped me see myself differently, coaching myself, and really help he'll integrate some of those anxiety or depression patterns. And I knew, oh my gosh, if I can do that, if I can be okay, then there is hope for other people, and I would love to do that. And then in a few years later, I started my training. So my background or my journey into the coaching industry or into the trauma coaching industry specifically started off with that brain training. But then what happened is I got to a point where it plateaued, and I was noticing I was getting some other symptoms, some other ways of being that weren't necessarily working. It wasn't okay for me, and I started to think, oh my God, what's going on? what is happening, why the tools that I had up until that point weren't working, or weren't working to help me move beyond a certain point of where I was in my health. And then I started digging, sort of say. But I also say I always follow the synchronicities. This is something that I learned along my journey. It's like, okay, when something happens, it's like, how can I engage from that place of curiosity to see what's going on? Not from a place of what's wrong with me, what's happening, but it's like, okay, what are the signs? What is this trying to tell me? So then I was fortunate enough to come across mentors, people that really helped me to understand that there is more than not only the physical world, but more than the presenting problem. And it's about looking what's behind it. And of course, what's behind it is a lot of chronic stress, toxic stress, and like most of us experience, trauma, various degrees. And in a way, that's when I realized, okay, everything perhaps that I was experiencing, I don't know, physical level, emotional, mental level, it made sense. It made total sense. And this is again going back to what we were saying about the book, the beginnings, is like how our earlier experiences really do shape us. So that's how I came in a way into the trauma informed space. But the way I work, it's working with the nervous system, working with emotions from a place of curiosity, inquiring, really working on processing our emotions.
Mm.
But at the same time, I really have a passion for Eastern philosophy as well, but combined with Western practices, neuroscience, and finding a way to blend them together. And the same, I'm a big believer in sound healing and Chinese medicine, which the same, there are researches that show that yes, it's not necessarily woo things that work. So yeah, that's how I operate.
Wow, it really ties back to your share about the underworld, because it sounds like you did go through your own personal underworld, came out the other end. Well, I guess loosely speaking, being a lifelong journey, but you have that firsthand experience, and I think this there's so many ways of knowing, um and this sometimes we tend to, I guess in the Western world, we tend to forget about this, the value of, in addition to things we can study externally, things we can study from scientific research, which are valuable in and of themselves, also the knowing that you get from direct experience. I feel we probably have to get a little bit closer to that. Is that also what you find when you try to blend the two? What insights you have from there?
Yes, absolutely. And I very much resonate with that. And that's why sometimes I don't find it easy to explain my own work. And I always say it's not something that it's best spoken about. It's something that is deeply experiential.
Mm.
And also because we do have unique experiences. We are highly complex human beings with highly complex human experiences. And if we go into this world with also highly complex spiritual experiences as well. Yeah, so yes, it's very much experiential. And the same is like when we engage in curiosity, into that state of awe, wonder, but also intention, it really helps us not in a way to pathologize, to look at, oh, how we should be, or we might be because of that. No, it's about exploring what might be happening in someone's internal world and in the inner landscape.
Mm. I'm just taking all that you said in, because this is something that's present right now in my journey as well. And you mentioned synchronicity, so it's something I keep seeing popping in different places, and now you say it as well. This this value of internal experience, and how we're all so different, and we try to capture and simplify. And yes, there's a value in explaining our experiences in terms that can be generalized, and at the same time I feel we need to honor that we're very individual beings, and to honor what we know.
Mm.
And it's something that, especially, mm, navigating this area between science and spirituality, what I find is that there's a lot of shades of gray. So there comes a point at which you look for confirmation to external sources, but there also comes a point where you need to use your discernment and ask yourself, what makes sense and what doesn't in your individual case. And there's just so much unknown, actually, coming back to
Yes.
it.
Yes. And what I would also say is not only the unknown, but it's also the nuances.
Mm,
That everything has a nuance to it, but also the nuances that we can see, or the perspective that we see, it's also based on our experiences, but also our perception. So once again, there's another whole set of layers there.
I'd love to expand more on this with you. Um, because there were a couple of things we talked about in our private chats that I would like to bring to our audience as well, to really to bring to light this idea of nuance and how we look for black and white answers, but actually they might be more gray than we realize sometimes, and maybe we should let that be okay. So let me go into my next question for you. So in one of our recent chats, you told me about attending a particular workshop of Lynn McTaggart. So for our listeners, she's a journalist and author whose work is focused on healing via leveraging group intention. And the workshop Teo was attending was based on her Power of Eight technique. So to describe what the Power of Eight technique is, and this is something I got from Lynn McTaggart's website, um, when individuals in a group focus their intention together on a single target, a powerful collective dynamic emerges that can heal long-standing conditions, mend fractured relationships, lower violence, and even rekindle life purpose. So that's the claim behind this technique. And Theo, because you had direct experience with this workshop, can you share what that was like for you as a participant?
Yes. So the workshop that I attended, it was part of the conference of consciousness and human evolution. So even that in itself. So I think also because we were there for 3 days with a lot of world-renowned speakers in terms of spirituality, but also science, their own research that they do. So I think there was also a collective energy of what was possible. And this workshop was about her presenting her work, showing in a way videos and research. She also did a lot with the power, with the intention experiments, which is a different one to the Power of Eight. With the intention experiment of where she took it into Jerusalem, so even the conflict between Israel and Palestine, and how it really helped people to actually bring a bit more of a level of calm through the work that they did. Long story short, she was presenting all of this work and everything, and it was about then experiencing for ourselves how that might look like. So imagine we were in a room, I don't know, 500 people or more. And then out of this, well, 500 people, we were put into small groups of 8. So we're basically turning around our chairs and being in a circle of 8 people. And within that 8 people, someone, if we would have any kind of problem, health problem or challenge, if they would like to be like a volunteer. And what does that mean is that they will just be there in a way with intention, receive. So be the receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 7 people, me included, in a way through a meditation by closing the eyes and also visualizing from the heart, for the heart space, having a focus, an intention, like a prayer, but not necessarily a prayer, towards that person.
Mm-hmm.
And constantly visualizing that how your intention, how your, I don't know, compassion, healing, light, anything that goes towards that person. And I personally believe that, and also from her research, from many groups that are happening around the world using the Power of Eight experiment, it's in a way proven that not only that the person that is on the receiving end can benefit, but also everyone else within the group. As a giver, sort of say, I experience really profound connection, not only to the group, but also to myself. And that's really profound gratitude for being able to do that. So there's no more like an, I don't know how you call it, like an energetic shift that I noticed. So really, really profound. And also within that workshop, because we also do like some heart intention thing, I felt my heart like I've never felt before. And that's another thing, because that's also when my journey towards the heart intelligence and really discovering what's happening within the heart really began, because I experienced that in that moment. But then what happened after the intention exercise, she asked if anyone noticed anything, there's anything anyone would like to share. So there were a few shares, but one in specific that stood out was someone that was more towards the front. She was I think she was in a wheelchair. She had back problems, not being able to walk, but she felt that energy, and all of a sudden she was able to stand up from her wheelchair, and she wasn't able to do that in a few years, and that was in a way very, very, very profound and really beautiful to honor and to witness. And it's like as we call it, miracles, but we know miracles are more than instant, but also they can be instant. Yeah, it was really beautiful. And also what it was really, really profound was that at the end, the presenter of the conference, she asked everyone, all of us, to put our intention into Lynn, because she has some health problems and she didn't expect that. And it was really beautiful for 10 minutes, 500 people to open their hearts and put their intention of healing and compassion and kindness for her. So that was really, really profound.
Wow. When you didn't share this last part with me when we spoke privately, so this does sound, it does sound like a beautiful moment. And when you told me the story of the woman who stood up, that was something that really stayed with me after our chat. And it was interesting because my first reaction was, oh wow, that's so, I was willing to be there, to believe that. And then I had my analytical mind kick in, and of course that's part of my journey, right? Reconciling um these sides. And I thought, and I think this is where nuance comes in. So just to give a bit of background of where I'm coming from, looking at this specific story that you share. On a personal level, I do believe in the concept of a collective consciousness. I think scientifically, you have science pointing to there. So, there's there is a shown correlation, for example, between big world events like 9/11 and the behavior of random number generators. So they do deviate from randomness, and there is that correlation there. So we can't say, of course, we can't say it's caused by that necessarily. We can't jump straight to collective consciousness. But what I am saying is that looking at the body of research, there's all these things that point at, yes, perhaps it does leave open the possibility that, consciousness is a bit more than this thing that our brain does, and it's kind of, located here or in our body at most, that it is in fact non-local and extends beyond that, and perhaps we're all connected at a deeper level than we realize. So this is where the openness comes from. And I also have this very strong sense of responsibility, and taking things, not in a black and white way, but really looking at the nuance and really parsing what is real, what is not. I feel, so yes, I do believe in the possibility of a collective consciousness. What came out to me after you told me that story, after I reflected on it a little bit, was You know, with people and organizations who do this type of work, or who do any sort of healing work that does turn a profit, and I'm not talking about this workshop or Lynn, in particular. This is more of a general question. It does make you think that at one point, even if it starts from from scientific evidence that seems to point one way, there could come a point at which profit trumps honesty, right? And other things, human flaws, and other kinds of temptations could come in, and you could have foul play. One of my thoughts was, well, you could have someone like that woman who stood up. Again, I'm not talking about her in particular, but you could have people in the audience planted there, to make things seem like they're more than they are, or to ensure that there's an effect. Even if the technique would elicit an effect, it doesn't hurt to have a surefire way to have something there. The way I think about it really is the same as mediums. If you look historically at mediums, of course, there's been what I believe to be genuine ones, and also what has been proven to be fake. Mediums who had people planted in the audience and all that. But a thought that I had one day was, well, if you have a genuine medium who does have the skills that they claim to have, and they rise to fame, and they get all these pressures, and they can't elicit the information that they're expected to, like that, which seems to be the case, with these type of phenomena, that they're a little bit more elusive than we'd like them to be, then wouldn't they be tempted to cheat eventually? And if that's the case, how can we, to cut a long story short, how can we protect people looking for healing who are in a vulnerable position from that happening to them? What are your thoughts there? What could even be done to keep this open-mindedness, to keep this exploration open, but at the same time to make sure people in need are not taken advantage of?
Absolutely, and I totally agree with what you said. And the first thing that comes to me when you ask that question, first of all, like you said earlier, it's about that discernment and about finding out for yourself. And yes, I agree. Like in everything, and of course we have the light and we have the darkness, and they coexist, and they have done since forever. And yes, with anything that is good, there will be a shadow to it. And yes, I agree. And it's been seen many times when someone, yes, even a medium or any form of healing or shamanism or anything, there are genuine ones and they are, yes, fake ones. But I would say yes, even genuine ones. Yes, like you said about if they rise to fame, if there's too much pressure, then perhaps yes, their gift may not be the same. And I personally, from everything, a lot of the things that I've read or I've seen or experienced, I personally believe, so that's my own belief. It's also when it comes to the gift, because the same, we all have the gift. We have a gift. Yes, it is a gift, but we all have this innate ability to see more than the matter, to see more than the physical realm. Just we don't necessarily access it, either because we don't want to, because we don't believe so, or for various other reasons. But when someone can really deeply access this gift, what I would say is if they use it perhaps for not so good reasons, maybe that gift say like, hold on a minute, maybe we'll stop. Because of course, for the intention for everything that we use, if we're using fear, if we're using through pressure, if we're using through methods that are not so useful, that can stop. So in terms of people in a way really making sure that they don't get tricked or anything, it's about using their discernment and really seeing for themselves what works, to really check in with themselves, with their gut instinct, and really, yeah, seeing for themselves. But of course, we also have the placebo effect. So even this, like you said about the about this lady, about the experiment, if and of course placebos have been tested or yeah, in the main, it's coming more into the mainstream. But of course, with the placebos, if we believe in it, it will have more of an impact, and that is either using surgery, medication, prayer, an intention experiment, or anything. So the placebo effect in our belief system and our perception and our intentions, those are all layers that can help us to see something, if it's good for us or if it's not good for us. I hope my answer makes sense.
It completely does, and it's I'm happy you mentioned the placebo effect, because to me it's sometimes it's used as a lazy explanation in my view, because I feel there are those who stop at, well, this happened, this sort of healing happened, it was placebo, full stop. And that I find that, I find that is the point at which you need to push, because, well, it happened because you believed in it, right? At the end of the day. So, okay, so what is the deal with the belief and what's the mechanism behind that? And we're coming back to intentionality. So I feel that's where the interesting question starts, really. It's not really.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And also what I want to mention now, in terms of even with this lady healing, and in terms of with healing and with the placebo effect, I found really interesting. So in a book called Cured by Dr. Jeff Rediger, is an American psychiatrist. Anyway, he spent almost 20 years researching spontaneous healing.
Hmm.
And of course, through his medical training and all of that, he thought, oh my God, I need to have really good cases and to showcase exactly, to see when they were diagnosed, to have evidence of the diagnosed, when they were cured, evidence that the illness is not there and everything. But one case that really stood up for me in his book, which I highly recommend to everyone, is this guy that had a very rare form of cancer, I think, and he was going to various scans, but all of a sudden, so he had literally had a spontaneous healing, and he was documented. So he had a diagnosis of this rare cancer, and then he went for an MRI scan. And literally, while he was in the MRI scan, he thought that this is how the lights in the MRI scan work. But all of a sudden, he felt like he was outside of his body, so like an out of body experience, or he felt this light, this colors, and he had an amazing experience. But he didn't make anything out of it. He thought, okay, maybe this is what everyone experiences in an MRI scan. So he didn't make anything out of it, and he didn't go with any intention or anything. But what happened after that, when they looked at the results, there was no cancer.
Oh.
So whatever he experienced in that MRI scan, something happened.
Was there nothing else that happened besides him having the spontaneous experience?
Not at that point.
That's really interesting. We're gonna link the book in the show notes, so
Yeah.
our
And it's
listeners.
a book that I highly, yes, it's a book that I highly recommend. And yes, and the same, one of the reasons he speaks about the book, it's about really a case of spontaneous healing. And also yes, he had this diagnosis, and also some of the researchers, some of the people that are really interested to see what is going on with MRI scan, because an MRI scan is different than a CT scan.
Mm-hmm.
Because MRI, it's not invasive, so it's about how the atomic particles and all of that really change the atomic particles within ourselves, in our cells. So something happens, and there've been other cases where they've been shown that someone going into an MRI scan, it really helps with depression,
Oh,
with anxiety and all of that. I found it really, really fascinating. And the
so
way he explains it in the book, he links in talking about the observer in quantum physics, the observer experiment. So highly recommend it. I'm gonna leave it there.
so what I hear is they suspect the spontaneous healing, at least in that case, might have had something to do with the MRI itself, with the equipment.
Yes, and yes, the imaging, because what happens is, I think in the imaging with the radio, it's radio frequencies. In the radio frequencies, something happens, yes, with the atomic particles, which somehow the atomic particles change something in the, but it wasn't that everything that was happening on a physical, on a matter, he had this visualization. he had this image of lights or things happening and something happening within his body. So there was more also than what the eyes can see. And that's
Yeah.
why I also find fascinating about the observer experiment in terms of quantum physics, and what happens is when someone looks at the particles, what happens to that particle.
Yeah, there's certainly that interpretation in quantum physics. Like last year, I started dipping my toes in it a little bit because it is something I kept stumbling on whenever I investigated phenomena like this. Someone would offer an interpretation that they related to quantum physics, and it's something I always bring up just to be skeptical around this as everything else, not in the sense that it couldn't be related to it, maybe it could, but as I understand it, there's a lot of interpretations that physicists offer as well for that
Yeah.
type of phenomena. So there's not the physicists in our audience, please forgive me if I happen to say something incorrect, though I'm hoping that's not the case. But yes, but there are multiple interpretations. There's not really full consensus there either. And talking about, very quantum micro, very small type of, very small scale type of phenomena might not necessarily translate one-on-one to macro. And that's something I always take with me, and I always bring up, not to stifle creativity, because that's what I like a lot about your philosophy, to work and to life, though, because I think we should keep curiosity open. I think sometimes we close the door way too soon on that, and that's
Exactly.
deeply unscientific. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that because I think today we're stumbling a lot upon a nuance and on this balance of, yes, offering interpretations, yes, exploring, and also being very present and using our discernment to really separate what's likely to be real from what's more likely to not be real. And notice how I use likely, even that's very nuanced in and of itself, right? But you mentioned something twice that I want to ask you more about. You talk about something more than the eyes can see, beyond matter. Did you have any experiences aside from the ones that you've already shared that indicate to you that there's more to reality than what we normally perceive through our, say, ordinary senses?
Yes, I had, but then of course even that is depending on what we mean by what we can see behind the eyes, with our mind's eye. Yes, I have had some experiences. Some of them are way more tangible, some less tangible. Um, for example, many years ago, I I would say I had quite a few miracles in my life. But one of them is many years ago I was due to study a postgraduate law degree, but then something happened, and all of a sudden I was just about to pay my first installment, and my life completely changed, and I was in no position to be able to do that. And I was like, okay, let's see what happens. And I remember my mom was very worried, what we gonna do. But I just had this inner knowing. I just said, I have no idea how. I have no idea. But there was this deep trust that something will happen. I don't know how, but something will happen. And also, perhaps no coincidence, but I remember at the time, The Secret came up, and I'm not necessarily, there's way more behind that, but I do remember that at the time I was reading the Secret, and I said, oh, that's interesting. But I had just this deep trust, this inner trust. And a week later, we were talking to a friend, and we were saying, but I wasn't necessarily a worry or not necessarily asking for money, no, nothing. We're just talking to a friend, and we said, oh, I'm about to start school, but I don't know quite where the money will come. I can't manifest them right now. And then a few days later, she said she's spoken to her husband, and she said, we're going to lend you the money.
Out
That
of
was one of the, out of nowhere. I never asked, I never said they have to be a certain way. It just happened. It just happened. And that was one of those moments when I said, oh my God, wow.
Thank you for sharing that. I think with these personal experiences, I love what you said. Depends, well, what is meaningful to you, right? What do you mean by something personally, by something beyond our senses? Because I have had stories like this in the past, and ever since I started focusing on this intersection of science and spirituality, I my impression is, um, people around me have been a little bit more open about their own stories, and sometimes we hold them behind if we fear judgment, right? So I I appreciate you sharing that, and I resonate with this idea of them being meaningful, um, especially in a subjective way to us. Like just the other day, I found myself telling someone a story about this dream I had. For our listeners who don't know, I recently uh, relocated back to Scotland in my case. And I in the past few years I used to have this recurring dream of one of the beaches in the town I moved back to. This is my former university town, and I would just have this deep desire to just go there. And I couldn't manage. I think only once did I actually manage to go, and I was always so disappointed that I couldn't manage. It was almost like a pool there, and at that point, I didn't. It wasn't even a faint thought in my mind that I would come back here. I thought that was completely, off the table, and I found myself telling the story the other day. Um, and there was something about that interaction. It was taken very seriously, it's not that, but there was also that feeling of it doesn't feel significant enough to share, but it does feel to me. So I know what you mean. Sometimes to a third party it might feel
Yes,
insignificant, but it's the feeling, right, coming back to your experience.
absolutely. Yes. And the feelings do drive that. And in terms of a slightly different experience that I had, but the same, it showed me, it was actually even more tangible in terms of what's possible in how we perceive reality. I remember the same, I think it was about in 2019. I explored many things in many modalities, but not also neuroscience or trauma based or anything, but also spirituality
Mm.
and lots of things. And one of the things that I experienced with, experimented with as well. I'm not sure if you heard Barbara Brennan, School of Energy. It's an American. Barbara Brennan, I think she worked for NASA. And then all of a sudden she moved into more spirituality, and she opened her own School of Energy. And it's all about actually working with the hands. And I think she has a workshop, or one of her first book, Light of Hands. So basically, in a way, becoming the energy, and how through the power of our hands, we have a lot of energy here, and we can, in a way, heal. Long story short, I went to this workshop and working with the hands. But one of the exercises, now to access deep intuition, was working with a partner. But it was actually how perhaps we can get information by holding an object.
Mm.
And that was really profound for me, because I was working with this lady, we were partnering, and then she gave me her watch. So basically, in being a meditative state is about me holding the watch. So I was holding the watch in one hand, and the other hand, I'm not sure if touching her knee or her shoulder. I think it was her knee. So in a way, connecting that. So in a way, being like a channel, sort of say. And I was really amazed, because all of a sudden I was getting these images, thoughts, and it was this beautiful. It was an image of a ship, of a cruise ship, and the sea, and a guy, an older guy, and like a path and everything, and all of this, and it's like ancient something, and it was the word ancient. I remember so vividly, was the word ancient coming up, and connection. And at the end, when I said that to her, she started crying. And she said that this watch that I was holding, it was her father's watch. And he used to love going on cruises.
Oh, wow.
Cruise ship. And on the funeral, at the funeral, this was actually her inheritance. So it was an old watch because also belonged to his father. So we had that antique, ancient healing, but also the photo, because I could see this clear image of him or something and behind like a cruise ship. And she said that this photo of him with the cruise ship behind him, it was the photo that he had at the funeral.
I don't even know what to say. That sounds like a
Yeah.
really impactful experience.
Yes, and I had no way of knowing him. I've never seen that woman before or after that workshop. And it was just by holding that watch. And it wasn't anything. And it was all of this information in a way coming in, images, words, things that were coming. I didn't know what to do with them. And I didn't necessarily touch any meaning, but when I was saying them aloud, she made sense of them. And that was really powerful for me. And I was like, okay.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It is, you're not alone in having this type of experience, and it's it does really open those doors to curiosity around, well, what is what is really the deal with our lives and our consciousness and what we can and cannot perceive. So I think it's so valuable, you and everyone who experiences things like this, to share them and to normalize them, so that we start having that discussion also at a wider societal level, aside from spiritual circles or very niche academic circles or an overlap of that. Yeah, let me shift gears a little bit, because you also talked about something I think would be very valuable for our listeners to learn more about, your heart and connecting to your heart. And you mentioned Lynn McTaggart's workshop as being the first step in you building that deeper relationship. And I know that today you are a heart math coach. So can you tell us a little bit more about that journey of the heart, what heart math is? Just immerse us into that world for a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the same, the journey into the heart started about that similar time, or actually no, a bit before. It was the same in about 2019, where all of a sudden I was receiving all of this information about the heart, which the same synchronicities, the more we see them, the more they appear into our life. And it was no the first thing was I discovered like let's say one of my spiritual experiences was Melchizedek with the flower of life. Yeah, Durmbavlo Melchizedek with the flower of life, and also awakening the illuminated heart is a workshop of 4 days of how you can connect deeply with the heart. And I remember the same when I started looking into the heart and everything. I first went on to the more spiritual side, so this, and then there was also heart imagery, which is a type of meditation, various short meditations, which connects into the heart space, and then you see what kind of visuals you get, which you can make sense of, or not necessarily, but very profound. And it was the same in the same workshop that also Greg Braden and Joe Dispenza, Ellen McTaggart spoke about the heart intelligence. And the same in that workshop, one of Greg Braden's talk at the end, we did a heart coherence meditation. And the same, I felt my heart like I never thought it was possible. And the way I see, and I know when I experience it like that, it feels a bit like, in a way, like a pain, but it's not a pain. It's just a profound sense of the heart space. And then I thought, God, because he was talking about the Institute of Heart Math and some of the research they did, and I thought really, really interested about that. So in just before the pandemic, after doing a lot of research, I decided to train as a heart math coach. And it's also about understanding this, what our heart holds, what it is our heart. And the Heart Math Institute, over the last 25 or 30 years, a bunch of scientists, so they started looking into what's happening with the heart intelligence, but also in a way the electromagnetic fields, how the heart is the deep sense of intuition and emotions, how our emotions can impact our heart, or how the way we respond, we react. They also developed the technology. So it's in a balance, which is a monitor which measures the heart rate variability. And one of the things that really fascinates me, but also from my own practice, it's about what the heart can hold. And of course, we know the brain has millions of neurons, but in about, I think in 1991, it was discovered, I think in Montreal, that when they were doing some research into the heart, that the heart is also called the little brain. And of course, we know about the gut brain. So we know and basically we have three brains. We have the higher brain, the heart is the middle brain, and the gut is the lower brain. And we know they talk about the gut brain, but not so much about the heart brain. But it has been proven that the heart has its own intelligence. Why? Because the heart has its own set of neurons. It has 40,000 neurons, which are called sensory neurites. So what that means, the information comes into the heart, but there's also information coming from the heart into the brain. And of course, now we know more because also the heart is connected to the vagus nerve. So by understanding this, and also the heart, how is the seat of our deep intuition. And when we bring this coherence, which is this balance between the heart and the mind, we experience life differently. We respond to life differently. We act more from a place of compassion, presence, calm. And I find that fascinating.
Has that been your personal experience, being on this path?
Yes. And the same, I find that especially if I do longer meditation, but also connecting back into the heart, that I can get different sensory experiences, different visual experiences, like imagery coming up that I wouldn't necessarily get it any other way. Of course, we know, as I said, the heart, it has the strongest magnetic field. So of course, in terms of, we are in a way in resonance with other people through our heart, and how that drives all of the systems into our body. And also, I like to refer, for example, the Chinese medicine. We know that the brain was, for example, discarded, and in Chinese medicine, the heart is called the Jade Emperor, and all of the other organs are in the service of the Jade Emperor, which is the heart.
So it's putting the heart at the center rather than the brain, which seems to be a more Western view.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
I've done a little bit of research into heart math before having this discussion, because I understand what you mean about the experiential side of setting that intention to connect with your heart. It's a practice I try to integrate into my own life as well. So there's the personal experience is certainly pointing for me to explore more of this. This is interesting, you know. And I also knew from research, for example, that I will dig it up and I will put it in the show notes. There was this one study that showed, I think I would have to refer back to it, but I think it was significant changes in heart rate, basically before certain disturbing or, you know, otherwise arousing stimuli. So almost like a sort of presentiment. It's kind of what it looked like, right? So it wasn't, you know, I see this disturbing image and then my heart accelerates. It was rather my heart accelerated before seeing the image. I believe this is what they were measuring, but I will link this in the show notes for everyone to have a look at who's interested. So that being said, both from a scientific lens side, and something else I want to put in the show notes is some criticism that I found just in service of allowing our listeners, you know, to see all sides of the argument. Something that stood out to me that I would love to discuss with you and pick your brain and heart on as a heart math coach is when I looked at their website and I looked at one of the free trainings they had. I think they were explaining their concepts, like a series of videos that you can also download transcripts for. They had a certain paragraph that stood out to me. I have to admit in a negative way. Specifically, they said, so they were talking about heart coherence. No, they were talking about coherence. And actually, though, can you just quickly define coherence for us before I go into this quote?
Simply, it's a state of balance. It's a two-way communication. When our heart and our brain are in the state of balance, we begin to have more calm and we begin to, in a way, to be more aligned with ourselves. But coherence, in a way, it's a state of when our physical, emotional, and mental state are all in equilibrium.
So we're talking about achieving
yes,
sense of balance. So the way they describe it here is coherence refers to the cooperative alignment between heart, mind, and emotions that allows more spirit, and I'll underline spirit, to infuse our system. Practicing heart coherence for even a few minutes lifts your vibration. I'll underscore that, lifts your vibration as well, making it possible for your heart's intuition, I'll put a question mark next to intuition as well, to inform your attitudes, discernment, and choices. Why am I picking on this quote? I found that it was, to me, it felt like a little bit of a slippery slope because I think it was one of the PDFs that was concerning the science behind, which I was interested in. And I felt it started off from the scientific backing, and then it went into something that to me looked like new age spirituality. And our listeners, especially those who already follow my work, know I don't have any issue on any side of this. I just didn't, it was unexpected. And again, coming back to that sense of responsibility and of knowing, enough consent, enough you know, protecting the people who are looking for healing to some extent, I felt there is this validity derived from scientific research, but then these spiritual terms made their way in a way that was not acknowledged. And it didn't sit well with me. Is this something that you noticed during your training, or was it ever addressed?
No, I definitely think that the creators of heart math, they are quite spiritual people. I did so, of course. Even the Heart Math Institute is split into various areas. So they have the institute where they do a lot of research. They have also a part where they do the training. And I did my training in the UK, which are certified trainers from Heart Math. And my training in UK, yeah, not necessarily. There is an element of that towards the end, but it's about presenting the science, presenting the technology, and some of the tools how to get at this just simple but very profound in a way, meditations or tools how to access that heart intelligence. And of course, for example, you can use it in a way to ask questions. You can use it like any kind of, in a way, meditation, to ask questions or to get more in touch with your heart or what you truly desire. But for example, from a personal belief and experience, and the same with research and everything, we sometimes we can get so focused on, oh, but show me the backing, show me the data, that we actually forget that in anything that we do, in anything that we are, there is something that is way above us, around us, that we cannot actually physically touch. And we kind of have taken the spirit out of everything that we do. Because, hey, in the Western civilization for the last 300 years, Descartes made sure we get to this stage of where we are right now, where we in a way split, and we think only the brain, or anything that, and we forget everything that's coming from here down.
Mm.
So yes, but also I agree, and I'm not sure if they changed this recently, but I don't remember. Yeah, look, seeing the spirit thing, so very well said, and I do believe, yes, especially if they're talking about more on the science stuff and everything. Perhaps yes, some of the words are important. Words create our reality. It can have that, yeah, interference. But personally, no. From my experience, yes, and working with them and training with them, didn't necessarily quite see that even from their trainings.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And you know, I'm with you, and I know we have a similar philosophy on life in the sense that we do both lean more spiritual. And this is why I find it really important to put this at the forefront, because for me, I realized what happened here. It stood out to me because I am guessing the whoever wrote that report, whoever shaped that report, their bias was showing through at that point. And I think we need to tread really, really carefully, especially at this intersection of science and spirituality, because there will be people who are interested in the science, but not in the spirituality. There are people who would never identify as spiritual, and I think they could be put off by such mentions. That's one thing. But the other that I'm concerned about is that we take a legitimacy from science and give it to spiritual concepts that I'm not saying
Mhm.
should not have their own legitimacy wherever it's warranted. I just don't think they should take it from the scientific side. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? I
Yeah,
think we should be
yeah,
very clear. This is this, this is that. And when they do intersect, we're serious about that. But I feel we need to bring them together responsibly if we want to get to the truth. That's where I'm going.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for engaging with me on this discussion, because I think there's, what do you think about this? I think there's two extremes that we can fall into. This is what I see. One is very dogmatic, very rejecting everything that has even a hint of what we perceive to be woo-woo, you know, just closing your eyes, just saying there's no point in me looking at that. It just sounds ridiculous, which is, I will repeat, not a scientific attitude. Um, and then on the other hand, of course, we have this susceptibility of organizations and even people who started off with good intentions perhaps, but then, you know, they could get corrupted on the way. It may happen. So I know I'm leading on a very dark, I have a very dark slant here, but I think it's important, and I think it's something that we need to be mindful of. What kind of solutions do you see to that, though? How can we even begin to address that at an individual level?
Experimenting, really seeing for ourselves. But every time we experience something, every time we do something, or yeah, we experiment, just to really check in with ourselves and see how we feel about that, and keeping an open mind to the science and to the more non-logical things. And of course, it's about, in a way, the logical side, the more on the masculine side, and the more flowing intuition stuff more on the feminine, masculine, feminine, if that's okay to say. But also, it's something that even when, as you were talking, it kept on coming, so I'm just going to say it. There's a quote by Joe Dispenza which I really really like, not necessarily in this context, but I think it's very relevant for this context. He always says that this is a time not only to know, but to know how. And what I personally think, where we are in this time of history, where there is, in a way, we have the technology to prove scientifically some things, this is the time that we don't only need to know how, we can know how.
Mm.
But what I would say, it's also very important to keep an open mind. And like you said, it's about not closing the door to everything. And from what I've read, I know there's also people in the scientific field that do have spiritual thing, they do believe in, they do all sorts of research, but they're
Okay.
really afraid to bring that in. They're really afraid to be pushed aside, not being believed, not being credited enough to bring all of their not only personal experience but also scientific experience.
I agree. There's definitely a lot of people in the scientific community who have the sorts of experiences we've been talking about firsthand, or just experiences they can't explain, who would be interested in studying these topics, but feel they would be sabotaging their careers doing so, and sadly it's not an unfounded fear. There's a lot of that happening there. I think from my side, I like this idea of, I definitely agree. Keep an open mind, don't close the door, keep curiosity. We're coming back to that. And I would also say, yeah, look at it. For God's sake, look at it. And also, don't be afraid to criticize it. So just one concrete examples from what I've been looking at in preparation for this interview. I'm coming back to Lynn McTaggart, so I was looking at her website, and she has a page with the evidence behind her work. So it's just titled Evidence. I will link it in the show notes. So I just downloaded the studies to look at them. And what stood out to me is that they are not published in academic journals. They are not peer reviewed. For our listeners, peer review is essentially quality control. You can think of it as vetting or double checking of studies by expert in the field, to make sure the work is scientifically sound. It's standard practice in scientific research. And this is not to say that what she and her collaborators found cannot be true. It's just to say there's that layer they're missing, which for me leaves the question mark. So I don't close the door. I'd rather, but I do want to see more evidence, kind of thing. And yeah, this is how I personally approach it. But yeah, I think we need a blend of the inner and the outer knowledge.
Absolutely.
Um,
And also to continue to have these conversations,
mm,
because also it's about doing our own individual work, but it's about the collective and bringing those ideas, talking about ideas, sharing them, because also when we share them, when we talk about them, it helps us to make sense of it as well, and to be open to different perspectives, and to be open to criticism, and to be open to see also, what am I missing? What is it that I don't see? Questioning, and at the same time believing and trusting.
it's almost like it's not a paradox, but there is a tension there between trusting and questioning. But that's the journey. And this feels like a good time to go into my next question for you, because let's talk emotions a little bit. So a big part of your work is teaching people how to process their emotions. And I find that super valuable. And having worked with you, I know how much of a rewarding process it can be. It's a journey I've been on for the past years. And what I did notice as well, it does take time. It does take emotional energy, including not just during the sessions, but also afterwards, to integrate, to process, to however you want to call it. And I noticed this is very energy and time intensive. And the reality is we have lives to lead, we have things to do, we're busier and busier. And I feel this type of emotional work, given the demands of the societies that um, we live in, if busyness is one of the values that we hold, it's almost impossible. And I feel almost resentful about this, because I feel on the one hand, we do need that time to just be. Just I feel it's such an important thing of being a human being, and to process and to be with our emotions. and especially after going through a worldwide pandemic, I feel we all have this emotional backlog we just need to go through, you know, and in addition to our individual one. And on the one hand, I would say, yeah, we all need to claim our time, you know, like craft the time and do it. And then I know that there are systemic even inequalities in place that, you know, mean not everyone has the luxury to do that. Um, so I find myself frustrated. How can people who either don't have the time or don't have the financial resources to work on to do their emotional work, to work with a specialist such as yourself, which is very needed, what can they do to make progress there, to help themselves? What are your thoughts on that?
Mm. I very much resonate with what you said, and I also always I do believe in a way that yes, it's our individual work, but it's also collective work, and of course there's impediments that really some of us can't get away from. So yes, the systemic oppressions and lots more other factors. And yes, for some people it's not easy, and I truly understand that. One thing in a way that anyone can do is just to, well, a few things. Very important to come to our senses, because every time we notice we either get into an emotional spiral or we're not here. If we're not here, so if we don't have both feet on the in the present into the here, we probably have either both feet in the past or one in the past and one in the future, and we're definitely not in the present.
Mm.
So one of them is really important to come back to the senses and really coming to notice the feet on the ground, my heart beating, really checking that I'm all here. So all of the sense, tactile, sensing, hearing, seeing, everything. One of them. Second of all is to sometimes just really asking ourselves, just noticing where I am on a physical level, emotional, mental, energetic, spiritual level. And if only if it feels easier to name that. Because only even through the process of noticing and naming, it really helps to settle. It really helps us to settle and really come back into ourselves. And another thing, just to really, I would say one of the processes that I do is, yes, like an emotional release, emotional processing process. But it's about verbalization and really allowing ourselves to speak out loud, because we spend a lot of time into our mind, but because we spend a lot of time there, we don't actually hear ourselves what we say. So to begin in a safe space, conversations with ourselves, to speak it out loud, because when we speak it out loud, we begin to hear ourselves. It's like, oh blimey, was I really thinking that or saying that? Oh, that's interesting. And also not to be afraid. And I know there's the same coming back in a way to spirituality and perhaps some of the new age is this idea, oh, we should always be happy, joyful, love. Yes, love is the ultimate nirvana for everyone. We want to, it's important just to want to go into that state, because as a space of pure connection, of joy, of creation, of everything. But at the same time, it's not only love or anything. We have a full spectrum of emotions, not to be afraid to experiment with all of them. So anytime we experience something, a strong emotion, or whatever we are on our journey, either spiritual or physical or mental, not to be to really notice how we're relating to ourselves, and not to relate to ourselves from a place of fear, but more from a place of curiosity. And I always say that curiosity is a very underrated skill. And of course, curiosity, it was something that none of us learned. And also, we learned from history that perhaps it's not okay to be that curious. So, in a way, coming back to the conversation in terms of science and spirituality, people that were at the forefront of new discoveries, they did it from a place of curiosity. But there were times when that was very, very unsafe.
Mm.
So many people have even lost their lives, sacrificed their lives because they were curious. And you know, in English, the saying, curiosity killed the cat.
Mm.
So there is also a belief that, oh, curiosity, I better stay away from it. So that's why I say curiosity, it is an underrated skill. The more we practice that muscle of curiosity about ourselves, about our experience, really helps us to see ourselves differently.
Mm.
And also to really see, why do we want to do this? Because also our inner work, it's a gift that we give to ourselves. And it's a gift that helps us be present. And when we're present, we notice more. We're more open. And that's when things emerge, things come our way. And also, what I would say is the more we work with ourselves, I also say from a spiritual perspective, we can attain and we can connect with higher realms, with be more spiritual, the more we work with the body. So spirituality is not only from here upwards, it's actually like a channel, a microcosmic, through the body back up.
That's beautiful. And you basically just answered my next question, because I wanted to ask what is spirituality to you. So I don't know if you want to add anything there, but when you think spirituality and God, what do these things mean for you personally?
Whew, many things, and they continue to develop. As a background, I am Christian Orthodox. Um, I My first thing I want to say, I was very religious. I am, but different now. Strong Christian beliefs. Um, but over the years, I have also changed my perception. I still believe in God, name it God, universe, the divine, or like one of my teachers calls it, the more, which I really, really love. And I know that it's more perhaps than we are been taught in some textbooks. It is what I've also learned, that it's a deeply the same personal experience. But what I have found is there are deeper levels to experience that when we are more connected with ourselves and with the earth. And one of the things that the way I like to explain it in terms of spirituality, Mother Earth, or where I am, imagine an infinity loop. And I am, personally, I believe I'm in that middle. And there is the earth and there's the universe. And I'm in the middle, and it's constant. It's the earth through me and the universe. And I'm always here in the middle. And when I allow myself to open to both the upper world and the underworld and the present, I get to experience myself, the world, and everything around me differently.
That's beautiful, and a beautiful visual to keep in mind as well. And I want now for us to project a little bit more into the future. So Theo, imagine it's 50 years from now, and we're looking at trauma work and how it's conducted. How do you hope that trauma work will look like in 50 years?
Mm. Thank you for asking this question, because actually my mission, my deep mission, is to help us to become a trauma-informed society.
Mm.
Society, not societies, because we're all under one roof, basically. What does it look like? First of all, is to really be attuned to our own needs and to the needs of others. To really be present to what it is. And also not to be afraid of what's emerging and all of the challenges that we have. And to really go back to the basics. Going back to the basics is that the same, that infinity loop, where we're in the middle, where we deeply connect with resources, with nature, with the elements. And at the same time, connecting to the skies, to the more, to anything that's around there. And the same in terms of the trauma, our ancestors, they experienced a lot of trauma since day one, since millennia. But I personally think that they had a different relationship to it. They were not afraid of it. But why? It's because they had rituals. They had communities where they would all sit and grieve. And also the process of grieving, it's about having stories, storytelling, where we make sense of what happened. Singing, dancing, writing, drawing. But of course, all of these things, especially in the Western society, I can poo-pooed. I consider, nah, I will do that later or never. So the more we help ourselves to make sense of what is happening at an individual level and a collective level, it will really help us to transform the world and to access more of the spiritual side as well.
Beautiful. Is there something that I haven't asked you about, but you'd like to share with our listeners? It could be an insight, an experience, book recommendations, whatever comes to you.
Whatever comes to me. Also from a personal experience, especially in a way if anyone's on a healing journey, or especially health healing journey, or trauma recovery, is to the same, to really help us to connect to the good stuff, to never forget to access joy, because that is part of us. So no matter how much inner work we do, even spiritual or physical, anything, to go there, but also to come on the other side. So it's the same, going into the underworld, basically being like Persephone, which was Hades' wife. She was spending 6 months in the underworld and 6 months in the upper world with her mother. A bit like that. So never to forget, not to go too much into one area or too much into the other area, to pendulate between the two. And always remember, we're in the middle, we're here, we're present, and being present to life.
Wonderful. So my last question for you is, where can our listeners find you?
My favorite platform on Instagram at Teodora Pile, or my website, teodorapile.com.
Excellent. We will have that in the show notes. And so I wanted to express my gratefulness to you for being here today, for being in this space and co-creating this discussion, this beautiful discussion. I really enjoyed the time with you. And I want to thank you for sharing your time, your knowledge, and your wisdom with us today. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Likewise, thank you very much for the invitation. It was a beautiful conversation. And yeah, thank you for all that you shared in the experience, in the questions and everything. And just on a final note, in terms of, because I'm an avid reader, in terms of book recommendations, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Because also we were talking about some scientific research and science and spirituality. One thing that really I absolutely love is Real Magic by Dean Radin and Radan Radin. Sorry, I can't pronounce his surname, but I really love that book in terms of going through the history, where we've been, how we got here, and where we're going. That's one. Another one is Oliver Sacks' River of Consciousness. Really great. Another one is Cured by Jeff Rediger, the one I mentioned, with spontaneous healing. And like Gabor Mate say, a spontaneous healing, most of it's not necessarily spontaneous. It's a totally different relationship with ourselves, which is a key important aspect. And another one, Otto Scharmer, A Theory of You. And and Presence by him as well, which is, he talks about creating from the future as it emerges, which is a beautiful title.
Wow. To our listeners, we'll have this in the show notes. And if you want to see the books that Theo is reading, she is an avid book reader, and her stories are full of wonderful book recommendations. So if you follow her on Instagram, you will definitely see more very worthy book features. Um, Thank you so much, Theo. I appreciate you, and it was a pleasure to have you on.
Likewise, thank you.